Nice to see you, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for filling the room as well. It's an important subject that we're going to touch upon today, and we're happy to see that there's a lot of interest in women's rights in Saudi Arabia. I think before starting, I would just like to express our sincere solidarity with what is happening in Gaza and in Lebanon. On behalf of MENA Rights Group and the MENA Initiative and all the panelists here. And we just want to remind you that women are particularly vulnerable in such contexts and all the more targeted in context of conflicts. So, today we're going to discuss the issue of women's rights in Saudi Arabia. In the past few years, Saudi Arabia has introduced numerous reforms that are aimed at promoting women's rights in the country, such as lifting the driving ban on women and amending the male guardianship system. These advancements are being portrayed, obviously, as, positive steps, especially before the international community. And they have been at the center of Saudi Arabia's efforts to improve the kingdom's image following the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi 6 years ago. However, human rights organizations and United Nations mandate holders have documented a very drastically different reality. Since 2017, women who voiced their criticism towards such insufficient reform have been increasingly targeted and subjected to arbitrary detention and forced disappearances and acts of torture. Some of them have been sentenced to lengthy prison sentences, are subjected to lengthy travel bans, which are imposed on them and their families. Today, on October 9, 2024, right this morning actually, and currently, Saudi Arabia is being reviewed by the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and Girls. On this occasion, this event is bringing together Saudi women's rights defenders and experts to discuss Saudi Arabia's human rights record in light of its obligation under the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and Girls. And the idea would be to confront Saudi Arabia's narrative. We hope to be able to do that with our panelists. We actually hope that this review will constitute a crucial opportunity to press for change in the country. And maybe I can give the floor straight away to our panelists, but before that, I would just like to briefly thank the State of Geneva for their generous contribution that allowed us to hold this event and conduct advocacy activities in the past few days with the committee, which our panelists are going to tell you more about. It is now my pleasure to start the conversation. Today we have with us Lena Al-Hathloul. She is the head of advocacy at the Saudi human rights NGO Al-Qist. She's a women's rights activist and sister of Loujain Hathloul. Her sister Loujain bravely fought for the abolition of the male guardianship system and was arbitrarily arrested multiple times for peacefully and courageously voicing her criticism and defying the driving ban on women. We also have with us Mariam Al-Dosari. She's an associate professor at the University of London. Her research focuses on gender inequality in the Middle East with a specific focus on Saudi Arabia. We also have with us Dana Ahmad, who's the Middle East researcher at Amnesty International. Amnesty International published an analysis on the personal status law in Saudi Arabia and has conducted extensive documentation on individual cases of women's human rights defenders, including the imposition of arbitrary travel bans. We were supposed to have with us as well a fourth panelist, Khulud Hathi, who unfortunately was going to speak about domestic violence, which is a very hard subject to touch upon, and it was unfortunately too hard for her to be there with us today. So Lina will touch upon this important issue because Al-Qasd has published a report on that problematic. So we can go ahead. The discussion is going to be done in rounds of questioning, so it's going to be interactive. I'm going to ask a few questions to our panelists, and then I will open the floor to people here in person, and if there are some joining us online. So today, as I said, Saudi Arabia is being reviewed by the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW. The committee will review whether Saudi Arabia has actually complied with its obligation under the convention. And Lina, you have somewhat of a personal experience with the CEDAW. Your sister Loujain was actually present in Geneva in 2018 for the last review, because Saudi Arabia was last reviewed in 2018. It was her sister who was present here in Geneva. And she gave a public oral statement to the committee. She was arrested right afterwards and was sentenced to time in prison because of her statement. Loujain became an emblematic figure of women's rights in Saudi Arabia and worldwide. Today, you actually stood in her footsteps while she cannot be here. Could you maybe tell us more about the case of your sister, the harsh consequences that she has faced since then, and what has been your experience advocating with the committee?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Falah. Hi, everyone. It's very nice seeing you all. As Falah said, I'm Lina Al-Madloul. I'm the sister of Loujain. I became an activist after my sister's arrest. I had nothing to do with all of this before that. And maybe just a shout out to Uma, who also pushed me to be one. She's here today. So just to summarize my sister's experience, Loujain was one of the leaders of the Women to Drive campaign. She was arrested a couple of times because of driving. Including in 2014. And in 2014, she was imprisoned in what we call a care home. And it's a mixture of a prison for women who are disobedient, but also, women who have committed criminal offenses who are under 30. I mean, it's a mix of a lot of things. And so once she was arrested there, she also met with other women in this prison, or in this care home, and she realized that the problem is not only about women driving, it's also the fact that women can be imprisoned because they're disobedient. And so once she was released in 2014, she broadened her activism, and she was part of a campaign called I Am My Own Guardian. And maybe to summarize what the guardianship system is, it's a set of laws, interpretations, judicial regulations, and all of this that make a woman a minor till the end of her life and subjected to the will of her male guardian, who's usually the father or the husband, sometimes the son. And so Loujain gets released in 2014. And she continues her activism. In 2017, more or less, there were new announcements by the new Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, where, women were finally, in a way, a priority in the policy-making level. And they were mentioning, new regulations, the fact that women were a priority to the new vision, and so forth and so on. And my sister, in 2018, there was the review of the CEDAW, of Saudi Arabia at the CEDAW, so what we have today also. And my sister went, and she was actually live streaming what this official Saudi delegation was saying, and fact-checking it on Twitter. It's still there if you want to check. And so she was basically giving the reality of what is happening in the country. And going back to the Middle East, she was arrested approximately a couple of weeks later. She was kidnapped from the Emirates, brought back to Saudi Arabia, put on a travel ban, and at that time, the Crown Prince was about to announce that women were finally given the right to drive. And she received a phone call from the royal court saying that they're about to announce it and that she should not comment on it, whether positively or negatively. She didn't, of course, and the days pass, and my sister is arrested. So the state security breaks into her house. They forcibly take my sister. They do not say where they're taking her, and she's forcibly disappeared for a couple of weeks. Long story short, the state media had her picture and the other activists who were arrested with her on the first page of the Saudi governmental media, saying that she's a traitor, that she's a foreign agent, and without having any official charges. So then time passes, we do not know where Lujain is, and then she has her first phone call saying that she is in what she used to call a hotel. We later found out that it was basically a torture center, and during all of this time, she was not officially charged. So we did not know what being a traitor meant, for which countries she was a foreign agent, and all of this. So. And then she receives her charges, and what was really surprising is that it explicitly mentions the fact that she was in contact with Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, diplomats, and also the fact that she had applied for a job at the UN. And the only countries that were mentioned were being in contact with a UK diplomat, a EU diplomat, and someone from the Netherlands. So all of this was very, we received mixed messages about what was going on in the country. On the one hand, they open up to, at least the dialogue on human rights. They allow women to drive, but at the very same time, they imprison the ones who have been fighting for it. So that's the story of my sister. So in 2018, she was here, she gets arrested. And during all of this time, we had to advocate for her. And the Saudi government has never accepted to really engage with us. They always engage with international institutions, with other governments, but never with us directly. And so it's been very, today my experience seeing this delegation speak about human rights in Saudi Arabia has been the very least frustrating. Because when us Saudi civil society try to engage, they just deny our requests or ignore us. And today the CEDAW committee, so the Saudi delegation, was presided by the head of the Saudi Human Rights Commission. And the Saudi Human Rights Commission, we have various stories with them, but I think we can speak about it later if Falah has.
Yeah, I mean, we can jump up directly to it, actually, to link it. Today we saw that the president of the Human Rights Commission was presiding the Saudi delegation. And we've actually seen that this institution has been used in these international forums to simply whitewash Saudi Arabia's human rights record. And we've published a report, so maybe you can tell us a bit more about this commission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the Saudi Human Rights Commission was established under Mohammed bin Salman, so it's quite new, or at least it was restructured. And they are everywhere, so they engage with every government in the world. They try to tackle issues, but never with Saudi civil society. And when the report that we have, we documented many cases in which victims of the regime usually, or victims of domestic abuse as well, when they complain, they never get any response of the Saudi Human Rights Commission. And the latest case is the fact that my family is on a travel ban. we sent a letter to the Saudi Human Rights Commission with other activists whose families are also on a travel ban, and they never responded. So it's very frustrating to see them traveling the world and giving this narrative, repeating the narrative of the government on reforms without even genuinely trying to engage with civil society. And it is even more frustrating because they deny what is happening. And my personal experience, for example, so when my sister was tortured in Saudi and she was forcibly disappeared, we found out about the torture. The only commission that was a delegation that was allowed to visit her later on was the Saudi Human Rights Commission. So they visited my sister. My sister showed them her body. They saw that she was tortured, and once they left, they were actively covering up this torture. And part of the delegation, there were female members, and one of them, Amal al-Muallimi, was later promoted as ambassador to Norway. So what the world sees is, oh, finally Saudi women are appointed as ambassadors, but no one knows that what is the back scene, the story is she actively denied the torture of a women's rights activist in prison. So, women empowerment is it's a very difficult topic to have today, as long as, Saudi women are not the agents of change. For me, all of everything else are details, basically. And I invite you really to read the report, because our report on the Saudi Human Rights Commission, because they're also used with UN mechanisms. So, for example, when we have the case of someone who's forcibly disappeared since 2018, more or less, he had one phone call and was seen once. But the Saudi Human Rights Commission actively lies on their visits to him, because we know that he was not visited by the Saudi Human Rights Commission, and they even got the name of the prison wrong. He was not even imprisoned in the prison they mentioned. So the very existence of this Human Rights Commission is used for the Saudi government to be able to put the blame, or not the blame, the responsibility on a commission that can just pretend to do the work, basically. And we have not seen any genuine engagement with civil society.
Yeah, and I mean, we echo this. We actually published a report with Al-Quds where we demonstrate that this commission lacks independence. Just for context, for those of you who don't know, the Saudi Human Rights Commission is supposed to be a national human rights institution, an NHRI. And usually an NHRI is supposed to be independent from the government, holding the government accountable. In the case of Saudi, it's completely the contrary, actually. It's just a governmental body that is used to cover up such abuses. But thank you, Lina, for your testimony and for this personal aspect as well that you're giving us. It's much appreciated and very courageous from your part, so thank you. I'm going to turn to Mariam now and ask you a question about the reality of being a woman today in Saudi Arabia. What is the reality of being a woman, and how does gender shape every aspect of political life, social life in Saudi Arabia?
First, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for attending. So as Falah mentioned, I do research in Saudi Arabia. I wouldn't know how is it now because I can't go back home since 2015, and this is the case for anyone who speaks about Saudi Arabia. But I can tell you what my research say about women in Saudi Arabia. So historically, women in Saudi Arabia were used as were portrayed as a symbol of the family owner, and this is influenced and emphasized by the government as well. So a lot of what we see usually in the media blaming tradition and religion, but reality is the state who influence the politics and reforms or lack of reform in Saudi Arabia. So before the recent reform, which I will talk a little bit about them, but before that, women were completely controlled by a male guardian system to enter schools, to enter even medical cares, hospital, and so on, and to get a job and to leave the country. And since 2016, there was a very top-down approach for reforms, and I was a little bit hopeful, but I never trust top-down approach of reform, especially when the civil society is not involved. So the magnificent and the very famous Vision 23 was introduced in 2016, and it's quite important to note that it's written by McKinsey, and that's telling you a lot. So they hire McKinsey to write a report, which I will call is just a PR mission to make Saudi Arabia look good in terms of Western media. And why would they want to look good? First, because they want to attract Western investor to come to the country, and because also the country wasn't, there was before that Arab Springs and so on, and 70% of the population is young people. So it was not settling well. People wanted change. So when they introduced Vision 23, one of the main aim was empowerment of women. And what we saw in 2016, there was a mission first to let women enter the labor market in a huge amount. And they aimed to increase the employment, and employment was massive, was really high in Saudi Arabia. While the graduation is, they have a lot of graduates, but there's no jobs for women. So they aim to increase the job from 20% to 30% within a few years, which meant 500,000 women entered the labor market. In image, it was really good. But when I did first research to see how is those women in terms of employment, what we saw that women were shocked in jobs that doesn't give them career progress, doesn't give them any opportunity, and honestly, it was just replacing unskilled migrants, which was also a target of Saudi Arabia to get rid of all immigration in the country, which is problematic in itself. So women were clustered in jobs. First, they start with what they call feminization of the job. So some of the sectors, retail sectors, lingerie shops, they created like segregation areas where women can work and men cannot enter. Created opportunity for women. Women start working there, but with no career progress, very limited jobs. Then after 2 years, as our Crown Prince liked to do, changed his mind. So he said, no jobs, no segregation, everything is inclusion. We'll remove segregation. Bear in mind, those women come from very traditional backgrounds. So they entered the job, segregation moved, which I'm not against it. Look at me, I'm not against segregation. But still, like women were put in a situation where there's no system to protect them. So what happened, and after that I did another research in a few years to see how is the woman coping with all those changes that happening so quickly, and how they are caught in the middle between traditional society, but also government doesn't give them any right to protect them. And did a lot of interviews with men and women to see how is the job market. And what I found that sexual harassment was massive. Women were, and it was a form of resistance from their male colleagues, their manager. They don't want to compete with them in their jobs. And that's not very specific to Saudi Arabia. We saw it historically in sectors in UK and in US when women enter a male-dominant job and there is no system to protect them. Sexual harassment and unfortunately happen. So what happened, a lot of females felt they are caught in the middle. If they report to their family will tell them, don't work. Stay at home, so they will lose the opportunity to work. If they report to what they call official way of government reporting, there is no trust in the government and it will go nowhere as well. So they kind of internalize it in a way that this is part of the job, which is quite problematic. You can imagine the psychological effect of those women. And the main point that if reforms was the main aim of those old policies, wouldn't be the first thing that they should introduce a system to protect women, a way to protect them from harassment policies, that to protect them in the workplace, and also provide a very diverse kind of job, not just shove them in a certain job that just replace unskilled migrants and long hours and even paid less than their male colleagues in those jobs. And what we saw in the media for the recent few years, and I'm sure it's frustrating for any Saudis like us, that we see every few weeks a news article saying that there is the first woman who was appointed to that, the first ambassador who happened to be a princess, the first person who was appointed at the government. And it was heavily celebrated in the media. But then if you look at those profiles of those females, they don't represent every single woman in Saudi Arabia. They don't represent the majority. They come from privileged background, and to be honest, they play the system as well, and they are part of the government and the regime. And then we saw a lot of the media also covering every few weeks, someone climbed a mountain, someone the first shift. So you can see that women, and I'm happy for them, it's great that they are doing a lot of things, but you can see that women have been used to portray an image that cover the massive human inequalities and breach of inequality in Saudi Arabia. And one of the major examples that we always talk about, that women who campaign for driving, the women who campaign for the dropping of male guardianship, when those reform was introduced, they end up in prison. So the message was clear. I give you the changes, don't ask for it. And that's a regime that doesn't want first to listen to people, but also doesn't want improvements. And there is a massive break of any freedom of expression. Even things like small, like a tweet, will end up to women to be in prison. So there was a massive arrest, especially when the Crown Prince was appointed, for a lot of feminist activists. Any people who was part of the feminist movement was also were arrested. And there was increase also of asylum seekers among men and women. And I think Lina knows the numbers more than me. I think it was 5,000 in your report that you did, Al Host, that people leaving the country because they don't feel safe. And later case, we saw that they are right, they don't feel safe. If they go back home, they were arrested. Salma was an example of a person who was arrested when she just tweeted when she was UK. So no, I'm very suspicious of those reform, and I think women have been massively used to portray those progress image with the Crown Prince agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. And the vision to 2030 has been brought up multiple times actually by the Saudi delegation. It's always being put forth as, you know, reform, and women are being at the center of this vision 2030. So we've seen that a lot today. So it's very relevant in that context. I would like now to address the legislative framework that is applied in Saudi Arabia regarding women's rights. And human rights organizations have actually found that these reforms and the reforms that the Saudi government is putting forth are in reality, are void in reality. And they actually may constitute an impediment to the advancement of women's rights in the country. And we found that a number of legislations continue to subject women to a male guardian, for instance, in many aspects relating to their personal life. And they just provide for discriminatory laws that relegate women to second-class citizens. I was supposed to ask a question first to Mariam and then to Dana, but I'm going to switch for interactive purposes. Dana, maybe you could speak about the personal status law. Amnesty International has done extensive research on this and on the male guardianship system. Could you tell us more about Amnesty's finding on this, and also what it means that, well, the male guardianship system?
Sure, thank you, Falah. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I felt really emotional starting to listen to Lina. I'm sure you felt more emotional talking about that personal experience with CEDAW, because it really brought back memories of how I've been working on Saudi Arabia for the past 8 years alongside other countries at Amnesty. And the lack of engagement that the authorities have with civil society is consistent in these processes. And it's now consistent in writing, drafting, presenting new legislation. For example, Falah mentioned the personal status law, which is also called the family law in Saudi Arabia, which was passed in 2022. This law passed with absolutely no input from civil society, no input from women human rights defenders, women academics and activists in the country. We spoke to women academics inside the country when we were doing our analysis of the law, and they told us that they were not approached for their comment on the law or any provisions that they would like to amend or discuss or anything like that. And I think this is one of the biggest issues when it comes to legislative reforms. We have to start with freedom of expression as the right to all other rights. And as long as civil society, women's rights defenders, and others in civil society are not included in these legislative reforms, I think this is a major issue to having just laws. I want to talk about the personal status law and the draft penal code, because Amnesty did an analysis. Myself and other researchers have analyzed both these laws. I'll start by saying that Saudi Arabia currently doesn't have a penal code. It may be a shocking fact for many, but Saudi actually doesn't have a penal code which outlines crimes and punishments in the country. So any country has to have some kind of regulations outlining even like a range for punishments between this year and this year, for fines between that much amount and that much. In Saudi Arabia, currently there is no penal code. So this leaves judges with a wide discretion to determine what constitutes a crime and what the punishment for it would be. And this is the same for women's rights issues before the personal status code was passed. So as you can imagine, it leads to a lot of uncertainty. First, because people in the country don't know what acts are criminalized, what acts are not, what the punishment is. And for personal status issues, people don't know how the judge would rule on very similar cases. For example, a woman who would like to divorce her husband, there are certain regulations that a judge would follow, and the decision would be really different from case to case because there is no reference point that the judge can come back to. So with introducing a personal status law, it was part of a group of legislative reforms announced by Mohammed bin Salman. We analyzed the personal status law, and our analysis found that while it does introduce some positive reforms and does, in our view, lead to less discretion for judges to decide on punishment, it still fails to adequately protect women from domestic violence and entrenches a system of gender-based discrimination in marriage, divorce, custody, and inheritance, the four main areas that this law covers. The family law entrenches patriarchal gender roles that were already practiced in the country, but have now become codified under written law. One example is by expecting women to, I'm quoting, obey their husbands, and also, I'm quoting, makes women's financial support from their husbands conditional to the wives submitting themselves to their husband. So conditioning the support of the husband to the woman in relation to a woman's sexual relations with her husband, which of course could be extremely exploitative and could lead to abuse and letting abuse go unchecked because a woman for her ability to survive and continue in the marriage has to submit herself to her husband. And this is quoting from the new personal status law. In addition to that, under the law, women, unlike men, must have the consent of a male guardian to get married and for the marriage contract to be validated. So while the authorities time and time again have said that the guardianship system no longer exists in the country, we see it codified under this new law. The other legislative reform is the country's first ever penal code. So while there isn't a penal code right now, a leaked draft was leaked online and shared by law firms and Saudi lawyers in 2022. At Amnesty International, we consulted with a couple of lawyers, Saudi lawyers and other activists, to see whether it's worth looking into a leaked draft, because we don't know whether this draft is final or not and what stage it is. The authorities are not responsive with us about the process of legislation. But from our consultation with lawyers, we came to the conclusion that it is an authentic leaked draft. And our analysis also shows that, of that leaked draft, shows that it would entrench, if passed as it is, it would entrench existing violations in the country. And this includes criminalization of freedom of expression, codifying the death penalty, allowing judges to impose corporal punishments, which are currently practiced in Saudi Arabia. And in terms of women's rights, the draft penal code fails to protect women and girls from gender-based violence by conflating sexual assault with consensual sexual relations and criminalizing consensual sexual relations, as well as not recognizing marital rape as a crime, which is not recognized as a crime in any other Saudi laws currently. And one of the most problematic things we have found as well is in exempting individuals from criminal prosecution if they committed crimes in the name of honor. So it's phrased in a way that doesn't define an honor crime as a crime, but in the region, in the Middle East and North Africa region, most penal codes and other laws do have honor as a mitigating circumstance to prosecuting a crime. So in this case, if this law is passed as it is, in the version that we have analyzed, it would exempt men who commit any act or crime. It could be from abuse to violence to murder, if they say that this was in the name of honor. And of course, this is hugely problematic. Yeah, I'll stop here and maybe we can, I don't want to get into a lot more detail, but maybe we can get into other issues.
No, but
in the
thank you so
discussion.
much for this analysis, and I really encourage everyone to look up the analysis that has been published by Amnesty International. It's framed in a very simple way that is very accessible to the public. So truly encourage you to do that. But yeah, I would like to turn to Miriam to still speak about legislative reform, but we've spoken about the downfall of it. Are there any reforms? Are there any true reforms? Maybe you can just give us an overview of the different reforms that have been introduced by the Saudi government in recent years.
So the male guardianship have been changed with a massive announcement in, I think it was in the UN, that they will change it, will cancel it, so a woman can travel without a male permission over 21. Women can enter university, can get a job without male guardian, but still traditionally a lot of organizations still ask for that. So there is not real enforcement by the regime. And as Dana said, while some element of the guardianship have been cancelled, it's still codified in the personal law. So for example, they cannot get marriage without a male guardianship. And other reform is the personal law. So there is some changes that's supposed to be good, but everything was a twist. So personal status laws was announced also in International Women's Day, and because that fit the purpose. And then when I read the analysis that Amnesty produced, and it was very vague. I couldn't understand it, and I'm Saudi. and I'm supposed to understand those things. There was a lot of gaps, and I was actually going to ask that a question in terms of custody of the woman. So is it within the law, that the new law, that woman will lose custody if she gets married again of the child?
Yeah, so when
If you
it
can
comes,
tell us a little bit
Sure,
more about it, sorry.
yeah, for sure. When it comes to child custody,
Yeah.
there are two problematic things in the new family law. One is that the father is assumed as the guardian automatically if in the event of separation. The father is the guardian and the mother is the custodian. Unless there's a different agreement. But the mother can't automatically be the guardian of the child, and the guardian of the child in the law is defined as someone who is responsible for matters that are both material and immaterial. It's a very vague definition that could mean like the guardian takes responsibility for, I don't know, an asset that maybe the child has inherited or something like that. But this is something that the father has as a role, and that the law defines as something that the father has, guardianship. Whereas the mother is the custodian, and in a way it does enforce patriarchal gender roles. The second thing is in relation to losing custody. Unlike men, if a woman gets married, she has to prove, the onus is on her to prove that the marriage and the person she is with is in the child's best interests. And this term, the child's best interest, is a term that's used in international law and in in discussing child's rights. But in that reference, it's really vague, and the father could easily make something up or have something against the man that his ex-wife is marrying to then take custody away from the mother. Whereas when the father gets married, in the event of separation, if the father is remarried, the same provision of having the child's best interest is not applied. So it is only on the woman who has to prove, the onus is on her to prove that this marriage that she's going into is in the child's best interest for her to keep the child. And of course, this enforces discrimination against women when it comes to custody. And it would, if she doesn't lose the child, she would lose her life, right? It's choosing between the custody of her child or her choices and personal freedoms, which should be guaranteed. But the law does discriminate when it comes to these things.
Yeah.
I think Lina wants to add something.
Just one thing to follow up on that. And one more thing, because you mentioned it, and we heard it today in the session, that the personal law give a guideline for the judges in Saudi Arabia. But what's quite important to point out, it's the most misogynist institution. It's all male, and it's open to all their own interpretation. And they wrote the law in a way that they can do interpretation. So if a woman go to the court, and the judge will automatically take them, and so this is one of the main problems. And as you mentioned, the honor killing is also loosely defined. And in Saudi Arabia, women is for years traditionally have been held as representative of the honor of the family, the tribe, the society, the country. So anything can go under this honor elements of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just to add something. So Dana and Mariam spoke about laws as enshrined on paper. But there's something today. The Sida Hala Twejri, the president of the Human Rights Commission, as head of the delegation as well, said that the male guardianship does not exist anymore in Saudi Arabia, just bluntly like this, saying that it does not exist anymore. And I think that there's the reference to obedience, which of course makes the male guardianship still existent in a way, but also there is what is not codified but exists in practice, and that is the disobedience. And so a woman under the male guardianship can be considered as disobedient or absconding, so عقوق التغيب, so leaving the house without the prior consent of a male, or being disobedient, which is so vague that anyone could be put, anything could be put under this. And we have seen cases of women complaining, mainly on Twitter, on the fact that when there are new granted freedoms, including the fact that women can, for example, travel without the prior consent of their male guardian, because there is the disobedience right or law, this can veto the newly granted freedom. So a woman can be disobedient for traveling without the consent of the male guardian. And this is not written in a law as such, but I mean, if anyone wants to challenge the Saudi authorities, if you ever talk to them, in 2018, in the Shura Council, so it's the consultative parliament of Saudi Arabia, there was a proposition for the Ministry of Justice to stop accepting complaints on absconding and disobedience, which was rejected, which means that it is still practiced today. So you cannot claim that the male guardianship system does not exist when everything can be considered as disobedience, and which means also that you're disobedient to a male guardian, so you still have a male guardian. So just to say that other than the code, you have uncodified practices that makes the male guardianship system still present.
And do you think they do it? Sorry, I'm asking another question.
Please go
It's-
ahead. I have it.
Do you think they do it by purpose, that they make the law very vague, so it's open for interpretation?
I mean, Tazir cases is it's also done in death penalty cases, and of course it's politicized in a way. I think that having very clear laws that are codified would make it more difficult, for the government to change them. And yeah, I think it's easier for political changes and.
I also had maybe a follow-up question to anyone who wants to answer this question, but we've been talking about, reforms that impede the advancement laws that impede the advancement of women's rights, but you've been saying, Lina, that, there are practices that also can impede the advancement of women's rights. Are there any practices, something that's not codified, that might impede on the advancement of women's rights?
I mean, I would say you cannot have genuine reforms without reformers, and this is something I always say. You as long as you imprison anyone who wants to be part of the change, for me this is already a red flag, and also impeding on the real advancement of the law and of the practice and the interpretation at the judicial level. So I would say that, of course, the priority now is to allow women to be agents of change. Otherwise, as a Saudi activist, as the sister of a former political prisoner, I won't believe them, really.
Can I add to this? I agree absolutely with Lina that without women speaking, and since we're talking about women today, without having a feminist movement who is not in prison, there will not be a lot of changes. We don't know what women want. We as a Saudi, we know what we want, but people in the country, we don't know. They are scared. And one of the things I noticed recently when I was doing some of the interviews, and this is the government propaganda, that they portray any feminist movement or any feminist activist as a traitor of the government, as an agent of change, as a threat of the government and the stability of the country. And it's quite a bit shocking that people bought to it as well. So a lot of feminists is now even scared. They create this massive fear among people. They put example of people like Jane and others to create a fear that people cannot ask for change. So the people who is actually able to make change and able to be part of the civil society and create change is completely silenced. And without giving them voice, without having agency, not any genuine changes will happen.
Yeah, sorry, Dana, do you want to?
No, I wanted to segue to other other issues that impact women human rights defenders. I don't know if
Please go ahead.
From what Lina and Mariam are saying, just to follow up on what they're saying on the inability of civil society to be involved in that change. For years, the Saudi authorities have used existing legislation, even without a penal code, without a personal status code, and without consulting women on having a personal status code. They've used the counter-terror law and the anti-cybercrime law to crack down on dissenting voices, on brave voices. At Amnesty, we had a campaign called Brave, for the brave voices of people who have solely demanded change. It's not even dissent of government policies or being critical of the government. In Lujain's case, and for many of the women with her, they wanted to be part of the change that the authorities were bringing. And the issue with that is that it was criminalized because they were independent activists rather than people co-opted by the government. So for many years, even before the personal status law and before the arrest of Lujain, women have tried to form associations, but were limited by existing legislation in the country that didn't allow them to have human rights groups, didn't allow them to have independent civil society organizations. Even when both men and women, tried to form civil society organizations, they were denied. There is the law on associations, which governs as a civil society, if you want to form an organization, you fill out an application, you put the members, etc. And many women did try to form associations through the legal ways, but were denied. And I think that the authorities have, for years, used these vague laws, like in the counter-terror law, anything that disrupts national security, or in the law on associations, anything that is deemed as something like really vague provisions that limits people from formally being part of civil society. And it's a way to deter people, because even when people have tried to form associations and were denied, they were charged with forming an unlicensed organization. So no matter how people have tried to be involved and formalize their work and their human rights work within civil society in Saudi, they were criminalized for doing so. And the authorities have always found a legal way to say that this is criminal, this is illegal, these are terrorists and traitors, and this is what women's rights activists were branded at the beginning.
Yeah, and we've documented as well, all the cases that we document at Human Rights Group of women human rights defenders who are being sentenced to lengthy prison sentences are on the basis of the counterterrorism law or the cybercrime law. So, this links perfectly actually to the next round of questioning that I would like to ask you, which will focus actually on women human rights defenders. And I think it's the central issue here. And throughout, what has been said from the panelists, we see that women are increasingly targeted by authorities simply for voicing their criticism and for advocating for human rights. And I know that many cases have been documented. Amnesty has documented a lot of cases. So maybe Dana, building up on what you've been saying, could you maybe tell us more about the cases that you've documented at Amnesty? Have you come across, cases that are similar to that of Lujain's?
Yeah, so in 2018 and 2019, after Lujain was arrested with a group of men and women who were women's rights advocates and women activists. They were a group of men and women who were all lumped under a group trying to advocate for women's rights and then branded as traitors for doing that. And all of their charges, like Lina said were ridiculous. We were expecting much more serious charges being handed down because of the way they were branded as traitors, like treason or something like really serious. But then we saw attending CEDAW and talking to diplomats and briefing diplomats about the economic situation. So since 2018, there has been huge deterioration in the situation of freedom of expression. Both men and women have been targeted in this crackdown. After Loujain was released, there were many other waves of arrests targeting people for their expression online. And in recent years, we have documented more and more cases of people being detained just for expressing a couple of tweets in support of women's rights or in support of a detained activist, and then tried by the counter-terror court and sentenced to decades-long in prison. We have at least 60 cases of people whom we consider prisoners of conscience or people who have been detained for their freedom of expression in Saudi Arabia. And this is only the tip of the iceberg because there's a lot of fear in reporting cases. So this is what we know and what we have consent to work on, which is very difficult to reach for every case. So we are aware that the number of these prosecutions and the crackdown is so much more higher. I want to maybe highlight one case that is close to our heart and that we have been working on, Lina and us and at Amnesty. It's the case of Manahel Al-Utaybi, who's a fitness instructor, a blogger, a writer on social media. She had a Snapchat account. She used to write on Twitter and on other social media channels in support of greater rights and freedoms for women. She was an advocate for women to dress the way they want, to do what they want. She posted videos of herself as a fitness instructor, going to the gym, just an empowered woman doing what she loves to do. And also advocating for women's rights at the same time and for other women to do and dress the way they want, do what they want and dress the way they want. Manahel was targeted for just that, and we have reviewed her court documents and her verdict. She was sentenced to 11 years in prison by the counter-terror court for violating the counter-terror law for doing just that. And it's having these vague laws that enables the authorities to use them for such really ridiculous charges, like inciting women to have more rights or inciting women against government policies, which is ridiculous because it's everything that the authorities have actually been saying that this is what we're changing and this is what we're reforming. And in an interview a couple of years ago, Mohammed bin Salman himself said that women can now go out without a abaya. You don't have to wear the traditional abaya, the black robe. But Manahel was charged and sentenced for just that. So it's the irony that of women who are practicing exactly what they think is okay. And Manahel herself was also an advocate of Vision 2030, of the reforms that the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was doing. She has written about that on her social media. And she actually went out in a media interview a couple of years ago to say that I support these reforms and I believe that we are headed towards change. And I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact words, but this is what stuck with me, is that she believed that the authorities wanted to truly reform and advance women's rights. And this is why she felt empowered to be a fitness instructor and wear her leggings to the gym and go out in a t-shirt without fearing arrest for that. But this is exactly what she's now in prison for.
I mean, This is a very like a case that very emblematic and very heartbreaking. Manahil and her sisters are actually facing travel bans as well. And Lina, you yourself, a women's rights defender, find yourself in exile, and you have maybe a personal closeness with travel bans and the use of travel bans as a tool to repress fundamental freedoms. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely, thank you. Maybe just as Dana was saying, sorry, what did I want to say?
About Manahil.
What's important to note is that given that Saudi Arabia does not allow human rights organizations on the ground, that trials are held behind closed doors, it's really difficult to get information. So, for example, in the case of Manahil, the information comes from his sister who had to flee the country in order to save herself from potential arrest as well, and to be the advocate of her sister. So we cannot have direct information from the country. It's very rare. But it's also important to note that. And maybe just adding on the double positioning of the government on some issues, I think it was 2019 or 2020, the state security on their Twitter account were writing, like the most serious crimes and, a bit of a hierarchy in the crimes. And one of the crimes they stated was feminism. And this had so much international attention and backlash that they then had to delete that. But, it just gives you an idea of how things are run, that, there is no transparency in the process. You do not know who takes the decision. One day it's allowed, another day it's not allowed. Red lines are not clear. So it can lead a woman to jail for believing in what is announced as a reform.
Can I just say one thing about the Manahil case, because you made a really good point about it. And this is how dangerous the system. Manahil bought the system. Like, she thought it's reform happening. And this is very dangerous for a young woman when we see those all influencers who's paid a lot of money and come to Saudi Arabia, dress however they want. And young people think that they can do that, and there is no clear policy. And she ended up in jail because of that. Specifically, what they have been told that it's okay to do.
On travel bans. So travel bans are very problematic because they are most of the time not official. So you do not know that you cannot travel from the outside the country until you try to travel. So Lujain, my sister, we talk about a judicial travel ban on her, but Lujain was on a travel ban even before she was arrested, and she did not have any official decision on that. And just maybe for the story, I went to Saudi December 2017. My other sister, who also lived outside of Saudi Arabia, went in February 2018, so 2 months after me, and she got trapped. When she wanted to leave Saudi Arabia because she did not live there, she found out that she's on a travel ban. And she's been under a travel ban since, without any judicial decision, and we do not know when it ends. And so this travel ban is really, I think that people minimize the impact of a travel ban because it's not prison. But just imagine yourself in a country where you're not allowed to leave. You do not know why you're not allowed to leave, and you're constantly surveilled. You know that, so it's almost like a constant threat of arrest. And I think that the international community has, I think belittled a bit the impact of it, and I think people are now realizing. But yeah, these travel bans are really problematic in the sense that today, for example, when the Saudi delegation was asked about travel bans, and the representative of the Ministry of Justice answered the question saying that all travel bans are imposed by a judge, and it's up to the independent judiciary to basically, anyway, that it's the judiciary that imposes it. And I tried to talk to him after it was done during the break. I said, Assalamu alaikum, please can we talk about this travel ban, because my family is not on a legal travel ban, and he refused to talk to me. So, and all the complaints that we've made to the Saudi Human Rights Commission, we tried the state security level. It's just imposed by the crown prince, basically the state security, and you cannot challenge it. And yeah, so I do not know if I'm on a travel ban, but I would not take the risk going back to Saudi Arabia, because I would most probably be on a travel ban. But even more than this, I'm with Al-Qist, and being in contact with Al-Qist is already a crime. So I think I would be criminalized for this. There's also another thing in the case of Salma Al-Shihab, who is a PhD student at Leeds University. She's been sentenced to 27 years, and she's being retried at the moment for tweets. And one of the charges is retweeting one of my tweets in which I talk about my sister Lujain. So if someone can be arrested and sentenced to 27 years for a charge of retweeting me, I think that it would be I don't know what they would do, but I tend to think that it's not safe for me to go back. So yes, travel bans should be addressed as an arbitrary, a kind of arbitrary restriction to freedom of movement.
I don't know if I should open the floor for questions from the public now. If you would like to ask questions now, please go ahead. Otherwise, I have a question to the panelists as well, but let me just first see if anyone wants to take the floor and ask a question.
Don't be shy. You're very nice.
Then let me go ahead with an icebreaker, let's say. For me, listening to all of this, it's just, I think it's important to also put all of what we said in a wider context. And I think, the same question applies to all of you, but how can the fight for women's rights in Saudi Arabia maybe have, or could it have a regional impact in the MENA region? Who wants to start?
You wanna?
Sure. I work on a couple of countries in the Middle East, currently including Jordan and Saudi Arabia. And what we see in many of these countries is that there are copycat practices and laws. Usually we refer to copycat laws that are a lot of times copy-paste from one country to another. But we do see that the criminalization of one thing in one MENA country could mean the criminalization of the same thing in another MENA country, because these authorities and authoritarian governments, they're not democratic governments, empower each other when they crack down on civil society. In some cases, we have documented people being prosecuted in one country for criticizing issues in another country. So if, for example, a women's rights activist in Jordan or in the UAE or in any other Arab country wants to talk about human rights and women's rights and advocate for women's rights in Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf and regionally, she could be criminalized for that, because these governments stand together and often do have copycat laws. And the most recent example of that is in my work on the cybercrimes law. So cybercrimes law in this time is supposed to make the internet a safer place for people, prevent bullying online, regulate a lot of things related to the internet that I'm not my area of expertise, but from what we are seeing as human rights organizations, it is used to crack down on women journalists, women activists. And in Jordan, last year, the authorities passed a new cybercrime law. They amended an older version and passed it as a new law. And what we saw is that it is a copycat law of the UAE cybercrime law, even in the fines. So it's like the governments are not even being creative in trying to hide the fact that they are in solidarity with each other when it comes to the crackdown on civil society, because it threatens their existence. And this, of course, all applies to journalists and women activists as well as general civil society. So this is from my experience as a researcher on the region.
Lina, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think Dana is taking maybe from a governmental lens that they learn from each other, but I also think that civil society learns from each other. So in Saudi, the feminist movement, I would say before the program of 2018, I would say it was the most organized and trans-regional within Saudi Arabia movement that Saudi has ever known, I would say, in a human rights movement. And I think it had a lot of impact also on neighboring countries, including for the issues that are common, the guardianship, also the kafala system in a way, for my domestic workers. And so I think that not only governments learn from each other, but the stronger a movement is in one country, and especially Saudi because it's the biggest in the region, I think it also impacts neighboring countries. And Mariam, I don't know if you want to...
I agree, I absolutely agree, because we grow up reading about feminist movement in Egypt and so on, and Tunisia and Algeria, and you see that the Gulf country is very interactive and they are very similar. And as you mentioned, the feminist movement learn from each other and they can be stronger with each other's support if there is a freedom of speech. And that's why the government sees it as a threat, because it asks for changes, it asks for changes what we want, and that's opened the door for more democracy. And then that's why they see the any type of feminist movement as a threat for it, because it enables people for asking for change. But I do agree with Lina absolutely that Saudi Arabia was very strong in a country that very well known that to be traditional. For a country to have this kind of movement is a set example for other countries.
And especially that Saudi, I think one important point, if we only focus on Saudi is an example to the region because it's like where Mecca is, and so usually interpretations of some some interpretations of some laws would also be spread in neighboring countries. So if the government says that it's not haram to do something, so it's not haram for a woman to drive. I think that neighboring countries are also affected by this interpretation. So it's I think that Saudi is also in a special position in the region for that as well.
It's interesting, but maybe we can. I mean, I had a question as well regarding more specifically the CEDAW and the review that we've been through. But let me just ask you a question it's very interesting, asked online. And maybe each of you could answer. How do you intend to sustain pressure on the authorities and drive meaningful change on the ground? Should I give the floor to Lina first, or?
I mean, it's about consistency. I think that the government really bets on on people forgetting about a case, on people forgetting an issue. So consistency is the key, I would say. I think that no issue is solved without consistency. And another thing is people should believe civil society when we say that this thing works and not that. So when we say that raising names publicly helps a case, this should be believed by the international community and not believe the narrative of the government that is imprisoning this person, telling them that it only works with diplomacy. So just answering this question, it's important to be consistent and to listen to civil society, even though they're abroad mainly.
And just to add to that, they are not happy when we speak up. We are not a lot, but we are a lot. So we do research. Whenever there is occasion, we go either TV or radio or write a news article and just keep talking about it. It's exhausting, it's tiring, but it's important to tell them that we are watching and we will keep watching and we'll raise any issues that have been covered. And that's quite important. And in a way that we are not only fighting a system, we are fighting also the Western media that keep playing is with their propaganda. And for example, today meeting, it's not comfortable for them to see us all sitting there, although we couldn't speak in the meeting, but for them to see that we are there, we're taking notes, and they know we'll follow up with that, and we just need to keep the pressure going.
It's a question we keep asking ourselves at Amnesty, and I'm sure at any organization that does research for impact, and not just for the sake of research sitting on a desk. And it's really frustrating and sometimes really demotivating to see the lack of engagement from the authorities themselves. But I do think that documentation consistently does lead to more and more experts asking the right questions in the right places. For example, today we saw in the CEDAW review that experts raised every single question and case that we have documented as a group of civil society organization over the past 5 years. And I think that without this consistent documentation, this would not be possible. And I think in our work as human rights organizations, as journalists, as academics, it's important to seek to disrupt the narrative of the Saudi authorities, because this is what adds up to then form a pattern of violation. While we don't have access to the country, and it's really difficult to get even one case out of the country to document, if we do it consistently, this is how we can establish a pattern of a violation. And this can be done through human rights researchers, through the media, through academics. And one thing we always say in Amnesty is that our pockets do not run as deep as the Saudi government. It's really hard. Like you're saying, Mariam, that we're not a lot, and we don't have a lot of money to counter. Like they had McKinsey and other PR firms writing their vision and their strategy as a government. For us, it's individuals doing this kind of work, but our silence cannot be bought. So I think we need to raise our voices and keep using our voices to advocate for change, and also amplify the work and voices of diaspora activists like Lina, like Mariam, and others who are doing the work on the outside.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we've actually seen, just one thing, and because there's a follow-up question actually online. So, and then I'll give you the floor if that's okay with you.
Of course.
I mean, we've seen the impact that we've been having here at CEDAW. It's been really concrete when we've seen the questions that have been asked by the committee expert. And we're expecting that the concluding observations will hopefully reflect what we've been trying to advocate for. And the question that has been being asked is, are there specific strategies or actions you're considering in the aftermath of the review? So once the concluding observations will be out, whoever wants to take the floor.
There is something that we are working on related to freedom of expression, not only related to women's rights, but includes the crackdown on women human rights defenders. So Saudi Arabia in December will be hosting the Internet Governance Forum. It's a UN forum. It's a UN event that will have governments, companies, people from civil society. Amnesty and other human rights groups will try to attend, and ahead of that, in the next 2 months or less than 2 months, we will be increasing our campaigning on individuals who are detained for expressing their views online on the internet, because it shows the great hypocrisy of hosting such a prestigious UN forum in a country where you could be detained for a tweet. So there is a petition that I can share with people, and maybe Falah, I can share the link with you to share online. We have, I think, close to 100,000 people who have signed this petition, and the more the better. We are thinking of how to deliver it, where to deliver this petition. We haven't decided yet. But that's one way of taking action.
Maybe what's important for us, I think, is really that our work is visible. That all of the reports that we have, all of the information that we share, is seen. So if everyone here could follow Al Qist and maybe subscribe to our newsletter. We have a weekly newsletter. And again, I think I'll repeat that the government or the Saudi regime has really succeeded in forming a bubble from which information does not go out of Saudi. And the easiest way to challenge their narrative is to have concrete cases to raise questions about. So political prisoners are a priority when they talk about women's rights. Asking why is Selma in prison only for tweeting in solidarity with Lujain? Why is Lujain and her family still in prison? So all of the cases that we document and that we take the risk to publicize. I think that everyone really has a role in standing in solidarity with the people who have tried to bring change from Saudi Arabia, and naming them only protects them really. And so really do not hesitate to use the hashtags that we do. And one thing, maybe it sounds maybe a bit, it's funny, but really the Saudi government cares about what is said on social media. And, you always see like NEOM advertisements or whatever forums they're hosting. So even questioning in a comment on these paid ads on Twitter helps really. Using a hashtag, putting a picture of a political prisoner in one of the comments. Sometimes we feel a bit weird doing it because it doesn't seem like it might help, but they do care about this, and you'll see it with the amount of trolls that will answer your comment saying that you're supporting terrorists and all of this. So talk about political prisoners, it helps.
Yeah, it's similar to what Lina. I'm not part of a human rights organization, but I already was talking to Lina earlier. We wrote to some newspaper to describe the blunt lies that have been said today by the report of Saudi Arabia. So trying to just highlight it and keep highlighting all the time. And luckily today they lie so much that I think I can write 10 articles out of it. It was beautiful. Like every line I was like, that's a great article. So just repeating the same message in social media, trying to reach out to the newspaper, and you as an individual, just if someone tell you that there is reform in Saudi Arabia, highlight the problem. So it's quite important that we just keep talking about it and give voice for people who is back home, who is scared to talk about it.
And maybe just one thing to add to this is that the concluding observations are supposed to be binding as well to the Saudi government. If they find that Saudi Arabia has violated some provisions of the convention, then they have to remedy to it. So we need to keep the pressure going so that they abide by their own international conventions, which they have ratified. So that's something to highlight as well. I'm sorry, just to give the floor to you for your question.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the talk, and thank you for your work. It's also inspiring. My question is about, or rather I'm wondering, and I understand that the patriarchal regime in Saudi is very totalizing, but what I'm curious about is to what extent do other characteristics such as class and political influence interact with gender? For example, I'm curious about who are these women that are defending Saudi Arabia today in the UN, for example, and to what extent does a woman's elite status or wealth might be able to sort of mitigate some of the rules that other women are subject to?
Can I go, because I did actually research on that. It's a beautiful question. So in Saudi Arabia, you have interaction between tribal identity, between the class, and also gender. And in a way, and I interview some of the people that do kind of politic resisting, which is the type of silence resistance in feminist movement, because any visible resisting can create ending to jail. And what was quite interesting, one of the findings of this research, that actually women who come from tribes, yes, there's a lot of restriction in them, but when it interact with the class and wealth, they are more able to be vocal because they come from liberal families, their families are quite supportive, but within all of them, the element of silence is from the government. It's not related to their background. Other element that I found in this research, that some females who come from a tribal background, they feel that they are facing a lot of restriction, but they see that working is a type of resistance, able to enter the labor market or working in a place that's not segregated. So I agree, there is a lot of interaction, there is a lot of elements of it. But what's quite really important here, that to highlight that society is not resisting as Saudi Arabia is saying or trying to portray. For years and years and years, we heard that society is not ready for women to drive. Women drove, the sky didn't fall, society didn't resist, and nothing happened. So the problem that the Saudi government used this propaganda of that society is not ready. Society is not ready for diplomacy. Society is not really ready for women to be working in places that not segregated. And once they do the top-down approach, it's worked. The society is okay with it. So in a way, yes, class, education, and background can enable some women, but we also have a lot of cases that women who can kind of broke the concrete barriers and come from different backgrounds and still fighting for women's rights.
Yeah, I'm not an expert, honestly, but from my personal experience, I hope I'm not wrong, but I feel like the women being part of these delegations are genuinely convinced about what they're saying, a lot of them. Not necessarily Hala, because Hala has been informed and we try to contact her, but many in the Ministry of Health, people where there are some changes, but they do not see the repression as it is because they live in a bubble in a way. So again, it's not backed by any facts, any research, so I don't want to be saying anything wrong, but this is my personal experience. And also with some, I meet with Saudi women who come from Saudi for vacation and all of that. There is a bubble. A bubble exists, and I met with, just for the story, with a Saudi DJ, a female Saudi DJ who was very happy about what is happening and all of this, and she was telling me that most of her friends do not understand what I'm doing. She does, but most of her friends don't, because when you don't live, when you live in a bubble that is safe in a way, because the government won't touch you there. You haven't talked. You go to these concerts. You give a good image. Why not? So some women live in a bubble, and they're being weaponized, and they're the ones who would be brought here. I don't think that anyone who might see what the reality of things won't be part of these delegations, I would say. But again, no facts, no research.
No, but I agree with you, Lina. I just met a brave friend of me who agreed to meet me since we are 5. And I was talking normally. I didn't want to bring politics because I didn't want to put her in a difficult situation. And she was completely convinced that it's great, why you don't come back? And I didn't want to bring her comments that I can't go back, but also when I started to push a little bit, what about this, what about this? She said, oh yes, they live in certain bubble, and safer to live in this certain bubble, especially if you come from certain class, you don't understand what's happening behind doors.
Sorry. I have a question just on member states and their responsibilities in holding these resolutions that are binding. I wonder if you all can address, especially considering the fact that the women's rights, as you said, Lina, movement in Saudi Arabia was one of the most well-organized, and you have member states that are purported to be feminist and really driving women's rights, but then they are also transferring weapons and negotiating women's rights off the table when it comes to negotiating with Saudi Arabia. My question is around like the shift that we see specifically in Europe and also in the US in fascist governments now taking hold. Where do you see, this is a question to everybody, the possibilities of being consistent with these governments, and where do you see the shrinking happening?
It's a very tough question, I would say. I mean, one thing I'll start by saying is that it's been, especially recently, very difficult to not fall in the game of, people being with us because they're Islamophobic, for example. And this is where it's very difficult to draw the line, people who want to support because they're genuinely, for women's rights, and those who just have a political agenda behind it and would speak about, someone like Lujain, but not speak about someone who's, for example, hijabi, and yeah, there are so many elements to your question. So I would say maybe on a state level, of course, when it comes to women's rights, they always say it's a priority. So they always say that, yeah, Saudi Arabia is a priority, but then we see it also depending. I see it with the US, for example. When I advocate with the US State Department or Congress, depending on political context and their own interest with Saudi, their narrative around women's rights will also change. So, for example, when there is a security deal coming up or that they want to pass it, they'll say, yeah, but women's rights, women, it's evolving, no, it's going the right way. And then, when, they also weaponize it in a way, they say, yeah, but your sister was in prison and tortured, no, let's do something about it. Of course it's politicized because they're policymakers in a way, and their interest is first, I would say. But, I don't know how to continue that.
I'd also add that it's become more difficult since the war on Gaza to find, to reach our traditional allies in the human rights sphere when it comes to the advocacy we do at the UN with member states. And it's forced us to think outside of these traditional allies. So one thing that I would think of doing in our advocacy, for example, with member states to have a joint statement on Saudi Arabia. It's been since 2019 since member states came together at the Human Rights Council to address a human rights issue in Saudi Arabia. The thing is, since 2019, the situation has only gotten worse. Member states were empowered after the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. But then after that, everyone normalized with the Saudi authorities again, and Saudi was outside of the agenda of these states. So it became much more difficult to advocate with them. But now with the double standard, with the usual human rights champions who aren't really human rights champions, as we've seen in the past year, I think we are thinking of looking at other states in the global south, for example, who would support women's rights. We have something that we're working on, a campaign with a couple of other partner organizations targeting FIFA. And one thing we've always been thinking about is how they can also reach players outside of the EU rather than the traditional football players from Germany, from the UK, and as we saw with the example of Qatar last year, there was a lot of criticism on these acts of solidarity that are conditional. When it comes to one issue, states and stakeholders support it. When it comes to another issue in the region, they don't. So I think it's an opportunity for us to think of new alliances when it comes to member states. One thing I was thinking in my work, for example, is looking at member states that have made positive recommendations to Saudi Arabia in its current UPR, Universal Periodic Review, that are not the US and the UK and France and Germany, because even Saudi Arabia will criticize anything that comes out of these states now, given their role in the war in Gaza and now the war in Lebanon. So I think we need to start thinking outside of these traditional allies. But yeah, difficult to think outside of the box of the UN system. Yeah.
I don't know if there's one question as well.
Yes, I just wanted to thank all of you guys for being here today and for all of your insights. I have kind of an idealistic question. Do you foresee any possible sustainable mechanisms that would increase government tolerance of civil society actors?
You mean in Saudi or at the UN?
Yes.
I'm always very optimistic about the future, and I always think that that pressure works, and that it's not sustainable for the government to continue as they're doing now. So I would say that if the recommendations that we had about talking about political prisoners, that they're not terrorists, that we really put the spotlight on what is wrong in Saudi, that that they're criminalized, that I think that we can move in the right way, especially given the Saudi context now that they're hosting all of the events, and we have a hook here saying, okay, you want to host the Internet Governance Forum. Are you allowing NGOs in? You're having the World Cup in 2034. Are you going to allow NGOs in? So everything is an opportunity, and I don't want to sound naive, but I think that pressure works, and the more it is a loss for the Saudi government to be this repressive, the more they'd be inclined to allow some space for activists to do the work, hopefully.
Is there anyone who's also positive like you?
No. No, I agree with Lina that pressure will work, but I'm not very optimistic with maybe because I'm older, I'm not very optimistic of the Saudi government, but I have a huge hope of the young people. 70% of Saudis are young, and they are not naive, they are not stupid, and he's treating them as naive. I will give you fun and forget everything. And now they are open to everything, they understand their rights, and it's like a pressure cooker, and it will explode one day. And they will ask for more, and that's how change will happen. That's my view.
Revolution.
Dana, do you have something to add?
I think, speaking here in Geneva and from internationally, I think holding them to their own promises would make them more, would make the authorities more susceptible to hearing us. So if you're saying that the male guardianship system is abolished, and we find stories of people who, a woman who can't get married because her male guardian said no, or journalists have been working on cases of people who are unable to leave shelters in cases of domestic violence because the woman has to be checked out by her male guardian. And I think amplifying these stories is really important because we are holding the authorities to their own words and promises. Similarly, in the case of Manahel, who in her charge sheet, as we mentioned earlier, was charged with going out without the abaya, the traditional robe. What I would do is go and look at what the Saudi authorities have said over the past couple of years on this now being allowed and then holding them to that. I think this would shame them. And I'm sure that every time these cases are raised, they do think that it's a black dot on their record. I believe that the pressure works. I'm not very optimistic, but I believe that we have to keep the pressure up, no matter what. Even if I'm not optimistic about it, I think that as violations are happening, we can't just let them happen without talking about them. So I think whether we're optimistic or not, in all cases, we have to keep the pressure up on the authorities.
I just want to add one thing for you because I initially understood your question as whether there is space for NGOs, in the international forums, and actually, I believe that it's important to use these forums that we had, like the CEDAW and other forums that are here available at the UN in Geneva. So, yeah, these are spaces where NGOs can confront the government's narrative, and they should be used, and they really work well, and it's important to highlight that. I saw there was one question here.
It's okay.
I think we can take one question extra because there's a Lebanese caterer waiting outside for some Lebanese food. But yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to ask a question about how the courts are working in Saudi Arabia because I've learned so much new information over the past 2 hours, so I wanted to kind of clarify some stuff. So you're saying that there's a lot of, there's wide discretion given to the courts because of the vagueness of the laws and the national laws. Is there any sort of grant to precedent in Saudi law? So for example, if someone in the courts says, for Manahil, for example, says that, she's wearing a t-shirt and leggings and that's not allowed, does that follow through in other cases? Or is it really just based on the case and based on the way that it's represented in this one case? And if so, how do lawyers sort of deal with that? What are their mechanisms? I'm really wondering.
There is no precedence that judges follow. So the judges don't have any precedent to follow when it comes to cases. And when we say that there's wide discretion for courts, it's really judges that have the wide discretion to determine what constitutes a crime. And the issue with laws and how they currently stand, and without having a penal code in the country, is that anything can be considered a crime. So under the counter-terror law, destabilizing national security is a crime, right? And this can lead to decades in prison. Now, in Manahil's case, for example, Manahil wasn't initially tried by the counter-terror court. She was first tried by a regular criminal court. And then the judge decided, because there's no penal code, that this case doesn't fall under the mandate of my court. This is a terrorism-related case, so it should go to the counter-terror court. So there's no precedent for the judge to follow. It's his discretion to determine that this crime of advocating for women's rights, telling women you can dress the way you want, destabilizes national security. And this is how these crimes are determined. The leaked draft of the penal code doesn't really resolve this issue because it criminalizes freedom of expression in different ways. And we spoke to a lawyer who told us, as a lawyer, I'm supposed to read a law and really understand what it means and what's a crime, and it's vague for me. So you can imagine a citizen who's not, who hasn't studied law, who, just an average citizen would find it very hard to know what is and isn't a crime. And I think the issue is with the vague provisions in these laws that we mentioned. And in addition to the counter-terror law, there's the cybercrime law that also criminalizes expression in different ways. There's the law on associations, which doesn't criminalize anything, but also has vague provisions that don't allow people to form civil society organizations if they are deemed a threat to something related to state security. So all these vague provisions in these laws are what judges use to say that this is a crime, this should be transferred to the counter-terror courts, etc.
Can I add something? Yeah. So there's also the discretion in the sanctions. So, for example, there are cases at the specialized criminal court where the judge would say 20 years based on the cybercrime law, 10 years based on the counterterrorism law, and adding 5 by discretion. So yeah, and it's just explicitly written like this.
I think we can close the discussion here, but the panelists will be available outside around really good food, so please feel free to go eat. I think it's too much. So. Thank you.